When Clara Whitmore arrived at Ethan Hayes' ranch with nothing but a rolling pin and deadly secrets, she thought baking bread would be her salvation. She was wrong. Because when your past rides in with blood on his hands and an axe in his grip, even the strongest dough can't hold a broken heart together. Will love rise like bread in the warmth, or will it crumble under the weight of violence and grief? Stay with us until the end of this epic tale of redemption. And comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. Now let me take you back to 1872, to the Colorado Plains, where hope was as scarce as rain and miracles came wrapped in flour and tears. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon like a bad omen, rolling across the Colorado Plains under a sky the color of old blood. September 1872 had been merciless. Drought had cracked the earth into 1,000 angry wounds, and the wind carried nothing but the promise of another harsh winter ahead. Ethan Hayes stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, one calloused hand gripping the wooden rail until his knuckles went white. At 32, he looked older. Grief had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his sandy hair had begun to silver at the temples. The loss of his wife Margaret 2 years prior had hollowed him out like a tree struck by lightning, leaving only the shell of the man he used to be. "Pa." The small voice came from behind him, barely a whisper. He turned to see his daughter Lila peering through the screen door, her 7-year-old face pale as winter frost. Once she had been the brightest star in his sky, laughing, chattering, filling every corner of their home with joy. Now silence had claimed her like a sickness. She hadn't spoken a full sentence since the fever took her mother, and some days Ethan wondered if he'd ever hear her laugh again. "Just someone coming up the road. Little bird," he said softly, using the pet name that used to make her giggle. Now it earned him nothing but those haunting blue eyes, Margaret's eyes staring back at him with a sadness no child should carry. The dust cloud grew closer, revealing a figure on horseback. Not the supply wagon he'd been expecting, but a lone rider leading a pack mule. As the stranger approached, Ethan could make out more details. Slight build, worn traveling clothes, a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low to shield their face from the brutal sun. The horse came to a stop 20 feet from the porch, steam rising from its flanked sides. The rider dismounted with practiced ease, and only then did Ethan realize his mistake. This was no man seeking work or shelter. This was a woman, and she was looking at him with eyes the color of forest pine, sharp and calculating. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice carried a slight southern lilt, soft but steady. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair escaping from beneath her hat and skin that spoke of long days under an unforgiving sun. "That's right." Ethan's voice came out rougher than he intended. He hadn't spoken to a woman, any woman, in months. "You lost..." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Not lost. Looking for work." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Saw your advertisement in Denver. You need someone who can bake bread." Ethan stared at her, his mind struggling to process this development. When he'd placed that advertisement 6 weeks ago, he'd assumed any applicants would be men drifters looking for steady work and hot meals. The thought of a woman alone on the dangerous frontier roads seeking employment at his isolated ranch had never entered his calculations. "Ma'am, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Clara Whitmore." She stepped forward, extending the paper. "And there's no misunderstanding. You advertised for someone to bake bread. I can bake bread better than anyone this side of the Mississippi." Despite himself, Ethan found his hand moving to take the advertisement. Their fingers brushed briefly as he unfolded the paper, and he felt a jolt of something he'd thought was buried with Margaret, awareness, attraction, life. He jerked his hand back as if burned. "Miss Whitmore, Mrs." The correction was quiet but firm. Ethan's eyes flicked to her left hand, noting the pale band of skin where a wedding ring had once resided. A widow, then, like him. Something in his chest shifted a recognition of shared pain. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began again, "this is a working ranch, hard country. We're 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, 30 from town. It's no place for a woman alone." Clara's green eyes flashed with something dangerous pride, perhaps, or defiance. "Mr. Hayes, I've traveled 300 miles to get here. I've slept under stars that could freeze a person's breath, crossed rivers that could swallow a horse whole, and outrun more trouble than you can imagine. I'm still standing. I'd say that makes me capable of handling whatever your ranch can dish out." From inside the house came a small sound, Lila still watching through the screen door. Clara's gaze shifted past Ethan, and her expression softened visibly when she spotted the little girl. "Hello there, sweetheart," Clara called gently. Lila immediately shrank back from the door, disappearing into the shadows of the house. Ethan felt his jaw clench. His daughter had once been fearless around strangers, welcoming them with curious questions and bright smiles. Now she hid from everyone except him, wrapped in a silence that nothing seemed able to penetrate. "She doesn't talk to strangers," Ethan said, his voice harder than granite. "Doesn't talk to anyone, really. Sometimes the quietest souls have the most to say." Clara replied, her tone thoughtful. "They just need the right person to listen." Something in her words hit him like a physical blow. He'd tried everything to reach Lila, doctor's medicine, even bringing in her favorite aunt from Kansas. Nothing worked. His little bird remained trapped in her cage of silence, and he was helpless to free her. "Look, Mrs. Whitmore." He began preparing to send her away. A ranch was no place for a woman, especially one who might stir up feelings he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed. "I'll work for half wages." The word stopped him cold. Half wages. That was barely enough to keep body and soul together. "And I'll sleep in the barn," she continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Won't be any trouble. Just need 3 meals and a place to lay my head while I save up enough to move on." Move on to where? For the first time since her arrival, Clara hesitated. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, as if she could see something there that remained invisible to him. California, maybe? Oregon, somewhere new. Ethan studied her face, noting the way her jaw tightened when she mentioned her destination, the way her hands clenched slightly at her sides. This woman was running from something just as surely as the sun rose in the east. The question was what? "I don't need a baker," he said finally. "I need ranch hands. Men who can mend fences, brand cattle, break horses." Then why advertise for a baker? The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from a distant fire. Ethan felt his throat tighten as memories threatened to surface. Margaret's bread warm from the oven, the way Lila used to help her mother knead the dough flour, dusting both their noses as they laughed together. That was... He cleared his throat. That was a mistake. Clara took a step closer, and Ethan caught a scent that made his chest ache, cinnamon and vanilla, the same spices Margaret used to keep in small glass jars on the kitchen shelf. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, "I've been baking bread since I was old enough to reach the counter standing on a wooden stool. My grandmother taught me and her grandmother before her. I know the difference between a mistake and a man reaching out for something he's lost." The words hit too close to home. Ethan felt his walls going up brick by brick. "I don't know what you think you know about my situation." "I know a man grieving when I see one," Clara interrupted gently. "And I know a child who's lost her way. I know because I've been both." Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the barn. Shouts, the thunder of hooves. Then a crash that made the ground shake. Ethan was moving before his mind fully processed the sounds Clara forgotten as he sprinted toward the source of the chaos. Behind the barn, he found two of his ranch hands, Tom and Billy, struggling with Zeus, a massive black stallion that Ethan had been trying to break for months. The horse was magnificent and wild, 16 hands of pure fury and muscle, and right now he was doing his best to kick down the fence of the training corral. "What the hell happened?" Ethan demanded, vaulting over the fence. "Sorry, boss," Tom called back, dodging a vicious kick. "Was trying to get a halter on him, but he spooked at something. Been going crazy for the past 5 minutes." Zeus reared up his hooves, striking air like weapons. Ethan could see the wild panic in the animal's eyes, the kind of fear that made even the gentlest creatures dangerous. Something had set him off, and badly. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, approaching slowly with his hands extended. "Easy now." But Zeus wasn't listening. If anything, the stallion seemed to grow more agitated, wheeling around the corral like a black tornado. One wrong step, and someone was going to get seriously hurt. That's when Ethan heard it, a voice soft and melodious, rising above the chaos like music. "Hush now, beautiful boy. Hush now, sweetheart. Nobody's going to hurt you." Clara had climbed onto the fence rail, and she was singing, actually singing, to the maddened horse. Her voice was rich and warm, like honey poured over biscuits, and impossibly Zeus began to slow his frantic circling. "There you go," she continued, never breaking the melody. "That's right, darling. Just breathe now. Just breathe." Ethan stared in amazement as the stallion came to a complete stop, his sides heaving, but his wild eyes now fixed on Clara. She slipped into the corral with movements so fluid they seemed like part of the song itself. "Ma'am, don't," Tom started to warn, but Ethan held up a hand to silence him. Clara approached Zeus with the patience of a saint, never stopping her gentle crooning. When she was close enough to touch, she extended one small hand, palm up. The stallion snorted once, then lowered his massive head to investigate. "That's my brave boy," she whispered, and Ethan felt something twist in his chest at the tenderness in her voice. "Such a good, strong boy." Zeus allowed her to stroke his neck, then his muzzle. Within minutes, the same horse that had been trying to destroy the corral was standing calm as a lake at dawn, eyes half closed as Clara continued her gentle ministrations. "Well, I'll be damned," Billy breathed. Ethan found himself nodding in agreement. In 3 months of trying, he hadn't been able to get within 10 feet of Zeus without the horse trying to take his head off. This woman had calmed him in less than 5 minutes with nothing but her voice and gentle hands. Clara looked up then, meeting Ethan's eyes across the corral. "He's not mean," she said simply. "Just scared. Something spooked him, probably a rattlesnake or a coyote passing too close. Animals remember fear sometimes better than kindness." "How did you know that would work?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. A shadow passed over Clara's face there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "I spent some time on a horse ranch in Kentucky. Learned that sometimes the wildest things just need someone to see past the fear to what's underneath." There was a story there Ethan could tell, pain and experience wrapped up in cryptic words. But before he could probe further, Clara was stepping back from Zeus, her expression becoming businesslike once again. "So," she said, dusting off her hands, "about that job." Ethan looked from her to the now docile stallion, then to his ranch hands, who were staring at Clara like she'd just performed a miracle, which in a way, she had. "Can you really bake bread?" he heard himself asking. Clara's smile was answer enough, bright as sunrise after a long night. "Mr. Hayes, by this time tomorrow, you'll think you've died and gone to heaven." Against every instinct screaming at him to send her away to protect himself, protect Lila, protect the carefully constructed walls that kept his grief manageable, Ethan found himself nodding. "Barn's clean," he said gruffly. You can bed down in the empty stall at the end. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset. Work starts at dawn. And my wages? $2 a week plus room and board? Clara extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan shook it. Her palm was calloused, but soft, her grip firm and sure. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You won't regret this. But as he watched her lead her horse toward the barn, Ethan suspected he already did. Not because he doubted her abilities, the incident with Zeus had proven she knew her way around animals. No, his regret stemmed from something far more dangerous. For the first time in 2 years, he'd felt truly alive during those moments in the corral. Watching Clara gentle that wild horse had awakened something in him that he'd thought was buried with Margaret. Something that whispered of possibilities, of hope, of a future beyond the endless gray of his grief. That night after a supper that was quieter than usual, Lila had taken one look at Clara and disappeared to her room, refusing to come down even for food. Ethan sat on his porch, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The barn glowed softly with lantern light, and he could see Clara's silhouette moving around inside, settling in for her first night. She'd said very little during the meal, just nodded politely when he'd explained the ranch routine and answered his questions about her experience with short, careful responses. But there had been moments, brief flashes, when she thought no one was looking where her guard had dropped. The way her eyes had lingered on Lila's empty chair, the slight tremor in her hands when she'd reached for the salt. The careful way she'd positioned herself so she could see both the door and the windows. This woman was running from something, all right. The question was whether that something would follow her to his ranch, bringing trouble he wasn't prepared to handle. As if summoned by his thoughts, the barn door opened and Clara emerged, carrying a small bundle. She walked to the well behind the house, drew up a bucket of water, and began what appeared to be a nightly ritual of washing. Ethan knew he should go inside, give her privacy. Instead, he found himself watching as she loosened her hair from its tight bun, letting it fall in auburn waves past her shoulders. Moonlight turned it to copper fire, and when she tilted her face up to the stars, something in his chest clenched tight. She was beautiful, not the fresh-faced prettiness of youth, but the deeper beauty of a woman who'd seen hardship and survived it. There was strength in the set of her shoulders' grace, in the way she moved, and a sadness in her eyes that matched his own. Dangerous thoughts, he reminded himself. Clara Whitmore was an employee, nothing more. A temporary solution to a temporary problem. She'd said herself that she was saving money to move on, and that was fine by him. The last thing he needed was another person to care about another heart that could be broken. But as Clara finished her washing and disappeared back into the barn, Ethan remained on the porch long into the night, staring at the stars and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Because something told him that nothing on the Hayes Ranch would ever be quite the same again. Inside the house, Lila lay in her small bed, staring out the window at the barn where the strange woman slept. The woman had looked at her differently than most adults, not with pity or sadness, but with a kind of gentle understanding that made something flutter in Lila's chest. The woman smelled like the spices her mama used to use, and when she'd sung to the mean black horse, her voice had reminded Lila of lullabies and bedtime stories and all the things that had disappeared from her world 2 years ago. Maybe, Lila thought, as sleep finally claimed her. Maybe tomorrow wouldn't be exactly like all the other gray tomorrows that had come before. Maybe tomorrow might be different. Neither father nor daughter could have imagined just how different tomorrow would turn out to be. Or that the woman sleeping in their barn carried secrets that would change their lives forever, some for the better, and some that would nearly destroy them all. But that's a story for another part of our tale. For now, under the vast Colorado sky, 3 broken souls rested uneasily, unaware that fate had just dealt them a hand that would either heal their wounds or tear them apart completely. The bread that would break the silence was about to rise. Dawn broke over the Colorado plains like a prayer, answered painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded Clara of the bread she intended to bake that morning. She'd been awake for hours listening to the ranch come alive around her. The lowing of cattle, the distant whinny of horses, the soft shuffle of boots on wooden planks as the ranch hands began their daily routines. Her first night in the Hayes barn had been surprisingly comfortable. The stall was clean and dry, filled with fresh hay that smelled of summer meadows. She'd fashioned a decent bed from her bedroll and saddlebags, and the familiar sounds of horses moving in nearby stalls had lulled her into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. Now, as golden light streamed through the barn's weathered boards, Clara gathered her few belongings and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The ranch house stood silhouetted against the sunrise smoke already curling from the chimney. Someone was awake and tending the fire. She made her way across the yard, her boots crunching softly on frost-brittle grass. Through the kitchen window, she could see Ethan Hayes moving around inside his movements, efficient but somehow lonely. No laughter, no conversation, just a man going through the motions of living because he had to, not because he wanted to. Clara knocked softly on the back door, not wanting to startle him. After a moment, it swung open to reveal Ethan in work clothes, his sandy hair still mussed from sleep. His blue eyes were alert but wary, and Clara noticed the way he positioned himself to block her view of the kitchen, as if protecting something precious. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," she said quietly. "Ready to see what real bread looks like?" Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, or the faintest shadow of amusement. "Kitchen's through here," he said, stepping aside. "But I should warn you, it's not much to work with." Clara stepped inside and immediately understood what he meant. The kitchen was functional but sparse, clearly the domain of a man who cooked only because he had to. Cast iron pans hung from hooks on the wall, their surfaces well seasoned but dusty. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, scarred from years of use but sturdy. And there in the corner sat what had once been Margaret Hayes's pride and joy, a beautiful brick oven, cold and dark as a tomb. "She used to bake in that," Ethan said, following Clara's gaze. His voice carried a weight of pain that made her chest ache. "Made the best sourdough this side of the Rockies. Haven't been lit since—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Clara understood. The oven was a shrine to his dead wife, a monument to happiness that felt too sacred to disturb. "May I?" Clara approached the oven carefully, as if it were a sleeping animal that might bolt if startled. Ethan nodded, though his jaw tightened. Clara knelt down and peered inside, examining the brickwork, testing the dampers, running her hands along the surfaces with the reverence of a craftsman recognizing the work of a master. "This is beautiful," she murmured. "Hand-built, I'd guess. Whoever designed this knew what they were doing." "Built it myself," Ethan admitted. "Took me 3 months to get the proportions right. Margaret said it was like having a piece of heaven in her kitchen." Clara looked up at him, seeing past the gruff exterior to the man who'd once built dreams in brick and mortar for the woman he loved. She was right. This oven has good bones, good heart. It wants to be used again. "I don't know about that," Ethan muttered, turning away. "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself." But Clara was already moving her hands, busy with the familiar ritual of fire building. She'd spotted kindling in a basket beside the hearth, and within minutes she had a small blaze crackling in the oven's belly. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, alarm creeping into his voice. "What I was hired to do," Clara replied simply. "Bake bread." She moved around the kitchen with the confidence of a woman who'd spent her life in such spaces, gathering flour from the pantry, checking the stores of salt and yeast and lard. Her hands worked automatically, while her mind calculated proportions and timing. But part of her attention remained focused on Ethan, who stood frozen by the table like a man watching his house burn. "I brought my own starter," she said, pulling a carefully wrapped jar from her satchel. This culture's been in my family for 4 generations. Traveled all the way from Virginia to Colorado and never missed a feeding. The jar contained what looked like thick, creamy paste, but Clara knew it was worth more than gold. A sourdough starter was a living thing, a legacy passed from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter. It was history and tradition and love, all mixed together in one simple container. 4 generations. Ethan's voice was softer now, curiosity overriding his discomfort. My great-grandmother brought it west in a covered wagon, Clara said, measuring flour into a large ceramic bowl. Story goes that she guarded that jar more carefully than her jewelry box. Said a woman could always start over as long as she had her starter and her rolling pin. She pulled the rolling pin from her satchel as she spoke, a beautiful piece of work worn smooth by decades of use. The handle was carved with delicate roses, and the wood gleamed like honey in the morning light. That's beautiful, Ethan said, moving closer despite himself. My mother's, Clara replied, running her fingers along the carved flowers. She said it was made by my grandfather for their first anniversary. Every loaf I ever watched her make was shaped with this pin. Something in her voice made Ethan look at her more closely. There was pain there, carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone who knew its weight. She's still baking? He asked gently. Clara's hand stilled for just a moment. She passed 2 years ago. Fever took her and my father both same winter. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. Ethan knew that particular grief, the way it could hollow you out and leave you wondering how to keep breathing when the world had lost its color. I'm sorry, Sesame, he said, and meant it. Clara nodded, then returned to her work with renewed focus, as if movement could keep the memories at bay. She taught me that bread is more than food. She set her hands working the dough with practiced rhythm. It's comfort, it's home, it's the thing that brings people together around a table. She used to say that a woman who could bake good bread would never be without friends. Is that what you're looking for? Ethan asked. Friends? Clara's smile was sad and knowing. Mr. Hayes, I stopped looking for friends a long time ago. Now, I just try to survive one day at a time. There was a story there Ethan could tell. Something that went deeper than the loss of her parents. Something that explained why she'd traveled 300 miles to answer an advertisement for a job that paid half wages. But before he could ask, the sound of small feet on wooden stairs drew his attention. Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her white nightgown, her blonde hair a tangled halo around her pale face. She stopped when she saw Clara, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Good morning, sweetheart, Clara said softly, not turning from her work. I'm making bread. Would you like to watch? Lila didn't answer, but she didn't run away either. Instead, she crept closer, drawn by the rhythmic sounds of kneading and the growing warmth from the oven. Ethan held his breath, watching his daughter with the desperate hope of a drowning man reaching for a rope. Lila hadn't shown interest in anything for months. She ate when he put food in front of her, went to bed when he told her to follow his basic instructions with the mechanical obedience of a well-trained horse. But there was no spark, no joy, no sign of the vibrant little girl she'd once been. Bread's like magic. Clara continued shaping the dough into a smooth ball. You start with just flour and water and a few simple things. But when you mix them with the right kind of love, they become something that can feed both body and soul. Lila took another step closer now, standing just a few feet from the table. Clara glanced at her briefly, then back to her work, as if the child's presence was perfectly natural. The secret, Clara said, beginning to knead again, is in the rhythm. Bread can feel your mood through your hands. If you're angry or scared, it knows. If you're sad, it knows that too. But if you're hopeful, if you're thinking about the people who lead it and how happy it might make them, well, that bread turns out special. She demonstrated the kneading motion, her hands pushing and folding the dough with gentle persistence. Push away, fold over, turn. Push away, fold over, turn. Like a dance or a lullaby made with your hands instead of your voice. Despite himself, Ethan found the motion hypnotic. There was something deeply satisfying about watching Clara work her movements fluid and sure. She made it look effortless, but he could see the years of practice in every gesture, the kind of muscle memory that only came from starting young and never stopping. "How old were you when you learned?" he asked. 4, maybe 5, Clara replied. "Started by just watching my mama and grandmother. They'd let me help with small things, measuring salt, greasing pans. By the time I was 8, I could make a decent loaf on my own." Lila had crept close enough now that she was standing directly beside the table, her small hands gripping the edge as she watched Clara work. Clara pretended not to notice, but Ethan saw the way she angled her body slightly, making sure Lila had the best view of the process. "The hardest part," Clara continued, "isn't the mixing or the kneading. It's the waiting. Bread teaches you patience like nothing else can. You put all this love and effort into it, then you have to trust that time and warmth will do their work. You can't rush it, can't force it. You just have to have faith that it'll rise when it's ready." As if drawn by invisible strings, Lila's right hand lifted from the table edge, reaching toward the dough. She stopped herself at the last second, pulling back with a look of such longing that Ethan felt his heart break all over again. Clara saw it too. Without making a big show of it, she pinched off a small piece of dough and placed it on the table in front of Lila. "This piece needs help," she said casually. "Think you could give it a little kneading, just gentle like petting a kitten." Lila stared at the dough for a long moment, then slowly, carefully placed her small hands on it. She mimicked Clara's motions, her movements tentative but determined. "That's perfect," Clara murmured. "You've got good hands for this work. Natural talent." For the first time in 2 years, Ethan saw something flicker in his daughter's eyes. Not quite happiness, not yet, but interest, engagement, life. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Clara shaping her large loaves while Lila focused intently on her small piece of dough. The kitchen filled with warmth and the yeasty smell of bread beginning its first rise. Ethan found himself unable to leave, mesmerized by the sight of his daughter participating in something, creating something, being present in a way she hadn't been since Margaret's death. "Now comes the waiting," Clara announced, covering the loaves with clean towels. "First rise takes about an hour in this weather. Time for coffee and conversation." She poured 3 cups from the pot on the stove, adding cream and sugar to one before setting it in front of Lila. The child looked up in surprise. No one had ever served her coffee before, even the weak, sweet version Clara had prepared. "Special bread maker's coffee," Clara explained with a wink. "Mostly milk and sugar, but it makes you feel important." Lila wrapped her small hands around the warm cup, and Ethan could swear he saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips. They sat around the kitchen table, an unlikely trio bound together by flour and hope. Clara told stories of other kitchens she'd worked in, other families she'd fed. She had a gift for narrative, painting pictures with words that made even simple events sound like adventures. "There was this one family in Kansas," she was saying, "had 7 children and a father who was convinced he could only eat bread shaped like animals. Claimed regular loaves didn't taste right. So every morning I'd get up early and shape his bread into rabbits and chickens and such. Took twice as long, but you should have seen how happy it made him." Ethan found himself smiling, actually smiling for the first time in months. "Did you ever ask him why?" "Oh, I did." Clara laughed. "Turns out his mother used to make animal-shaped rolls for him when he was little. He was trying to recapture that feeling of being cared for, of being special. Once I understood that it didn't seem silly at all. People need to feel cared for." Ethan said quietly, his eyes on Lila, who was listening intently while pretending to focus on her coffee. They do, Clara agreed. Sometimes the simplest things can carry the biggest meanings. A warm loaf of bread, a cup of coffee served just the way you like it. Someone remembering your name, these aren't small gestures. They're acts of love. The words settled over the kitchen like a blessing, and for a moment Ethan could almost imagine what it would be like to have this every morning conversation and laughter and the smell of baking bread. The sound of another adult voice mixing with Lila's chatter. Because surely, if Clara could coax his daughter out of her shell, Lila would start talking again, start being the joyful child she'd once been. But then reality crept back in, reminding him that Clara was temporary, that she'd made it clear she was just passing through. And even if she weren't, even if she were looking to stay somewhere permanently, what could he offer her? A lonely ranch, a broken man, a child who might never fully heal from her losses. Tell me about the horse, Clara said suddenly, breaking into his melancholy thoughts. Zeus, how long have you been trying to break him? Grateful for the change of subject, Ethan leaned back in his chair. 3 months. Bought him from a trader who swore he was just spirited, not mean. But that horse has put 2 of my best men in the dirt, and yesterday was the closest I've ever come to getting a halter on him. He's not mean. Clara repeated what she'd said the day before. Just scared. Someone hurt him, probably badly. He's protecting himself the only way he knows how. You sound like you speak from experience, Ethan observed. Clara's expression shuddered slightly, and she stood to check on the bread. We all have our ways of protecting ourselves, Mr. Hayes. Some of us just hide it better than others. The bread had risen beautifully, doubling in size under the warm towels. Clara punched it down gently, then began shaping it for the second rise. Her movements were sure and practiced, but Ethan noticed the way her jaw had tightened, the way her shoulders had gone rigid. I didn't mean to pry, he said quietly. You weren't prying, Clara replied, but her voice had gone carefully neutral. Just making conversation. But the easy warmth between them had cooled, and Ethan cursed himself for pushing too hard, too fast. Whatever Clara was running from, she wasn't ready to talk about it. And maybe he reminded himself it was none of his business anyway. The rest of the morning passed more quietly. Clara focused on her bread, teaching Lila how to shape her small piece into a perfect miniature loaf. The child followed instructions with grave concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she worked. When both loaves went into the oven for their final baking, Lila stayed close, as if afraid the magic might disappear if she looked away. 45 minutes, Clara announced, checking the fire. Just enough time for me to get a look at your other horses, see what kind of temperaments we're dealing with. She was putting distance between them again, Ethan realized. Creating space after he'd gotten too close to whatever wounds she was hiding. He should let her go respect the boundaries she was trying to establish. Instead, he found himself saying, I'll show you around. Clara nodded without enthusiasm, but she didn't refuse. They left Lila in the kitchen, watching the oven like a sentinel, and walked out into the crisp morning air. The ranch spread out before them in all directions, rolling pasture land dotted with cattle, several outbuildings in various states of repair and corrals, holding horses in different stages of training. It was a good spread, prosperous and well managed. But Ethan could see it through Clara's eyes, isolated, harsh, unforgiving to anyone not suited for frontier life. How long have you had the ranch? Clara asked as they walked toward the horse corrals. 15 years. Bought it when I was 17 with money I'd saved working cattle drives. Margaret thought I was crazy wanting to settle down so young, but I knew what I wanted. She came around to the idea. Ethan's smile was soft with memory. Took some convincing. She was a town girl used to shops and neighbors and social calls. But she saw the potential here, saw what we could build together. By the time Lila was born, She loved this place as much as I did. They reached the first corral where 3 mares grazed peacefully in the morning sun. Clara climbed up on the fence rail, studying the horses with a practiced eye. Good bloodlines, she observed. Strong bones, gentle eyes. These are working horses, not just pretty faces. Margaret picked them out, Ethan said. Had an eye for horse flesh that rivaled any trader I ever met. Said you could tell a horse's character by looking at its eyes, same as people. Clara glanced at him sideways. And what do my eyes tell you, Mr. Hayes? The question caught him off guard. He looked at her properly for the first time since she'd arrived, really looked, taking in the proud set of her shoulders, the intelligence in her green eyes, the way she held herself like someone who'd learned not to expect kindness from the world. They tell me you've seen more trouble than any woman should, he said honestly. They tell me you're stronger than you look, smarter than you let on, and carrying secrets that weigh on you like stones. They tell me you're the kind of person who'd give her last dollar to help someone in need, even if it meant going hungry yourself. Clara stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across her face. You see a lot for a man who claims to keep to himself. Grief doesn't make you blind, Ethan replied. Just makes you wish you were sometimes. They moved on to the next corral where Zeus stood apart from the other horses, his black coat gleaming in the sunlight. Even at rest, there was something dangerous about him. Something that spoke of barely contained power and hair-trigger reflexes. Beautiful animal, Clara murmured. What's his breeding? Part Mustang, part thoroughbred, according to the trader. Wild caught as a yearling, but someone tried to break him wrong. Used force instead of patience, fear instead of trust. Clara nodded knowingly, and now he expects every human to hurt him. Can't blame him for that. Could you gentle him? Ethan asked. The way you did yesterday. Clara was quiet for a long time, studying Zeus with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. Maybe, she said finally. But it would take time, and I don't know how much of that you're willing to give me. What do you mean? I mean I'm not fooling myself about my situation here, Mr. Hayes. You hired me because you felt sorry for me and because I could calm one spooked horse. But you don't really want me here. I make you uncomfortable, make you remember things you'd rather forget. Soon as you realize that you'll find some excuse to send me packing. Her words hit closer to home than Ethan cared to admit. She was right, having her here did make him uncomfortable, did stir up memories and feelings he'd tried to bury. But not for the reasons she thought. Is that what you think? He asked. That I hired you out of pity. Didn't you? Ethan was saved from having to answer by the sound of the kitchen door slamming open. Lila came running across the yard, her face flushed with excitement, her mouth open, as if she were about to call out to them. But no sound came. She reached them breathless and frustrated, pointing frantically back toward the house. The smell of bread, rich and golden and perfect, drifted across the morning air. The bread's done, Clara said, understanding immediately. She swung down from the fence and started toward the house, Lila trotting beside her like a faithful shadow. Ethan followed more slowly, his mind churning with questions he couldn't answer and feelings he didn't want to examine. Clara thought he'd hired her out of pity, thought he wanted to get rid of her. The truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous to his carefully guarded heart. Inside the kitchen, Clara pulled 2 perfect loaves from the oven, their crusts golden brown and singing with the tiny cracking sounds that meant they'd been baked just right. Lila's small loaf came out next, slightly lopsided, but beautiful in its imperfection. Well? Clara asked, setting the loaves on cooling racks. Think they'll pass inspection? Ethan stared at the bread memory washing over him like a tide. Margaret's loaves had looked almost exactly like these, golden and perfect and promising. The kitchen smelled the same, felt the same, and for a moment He was back in time, back when his world had been complete and full of laughter. "They look good." He managed his voice rougher than he intended. Clara studied his face with knowing eyes. "Hard to have someone else working in her kitchen, isn't it?" "It's not that." Ethan started to protest, then stopped. It was exactly that, and they both knew it. "I just wasn't expecting to remember," Clara finished gently. "I know. Food has a way of bringing back the past whether we want it to or not. But Mr. Hayes hiding from memory won't bring her back. And it won't help your daughter heal." As if summoned by her words, Lila appeared beside Clara, holding up her small loaf with shy pride. Clara knelt down to the child's level, examining the bread with the seriousness of a master baker judging a competition entry. "This is exceptional work," she pronounced solemnly. "Perfect crust, beautiful shape. You've got real talent, Miss Lila." For the first time since Margaret's death, Lila smiled. It was small and tentative, gone almost before it appeared. But it was real. And in that moment, watching his daughter's face light up with something other than sadness, Ethan made a decision that would change all their lives. "I want you to stay," he said abruptly. Clara looked up from where she knelt beside Lila, surprise written across her features. "I'm sorry." "I want you to stay," Ethan repeated, his voice stronger now. "Not just for a few weeks while you save money. Stay. Make this your home." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and hope. Clara's green eyes searched his face, looking for something he wasn't sure he could give. "Mr. Hayes," she began carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but—" "Think about it," Ethan interrupted. "That's all I ask. Don't give me an answer now. Just think about it." Clara rose slowly, her gaze moving from Ethan to Lila and back again. The child had moved closer during their conversation, close enough that she was now pressed against Clara's side, her small hand clutching a fold of Clara's skirt. "I'll think about it," Clara said finally. "But you should know, Mr. Hayes, that staying in one place isn't something I'm good at anymore." "Why not?" For a moment, Clara looked like she might answer. Her guard dropped, and Ethan saw past the careful composure to the pain underneath. But then the kitchen door burst open, and Tom rushed in, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. "Boss," he panted, "you need to come quick. There's a rider coming up the valley road, pushing his horse hard. Looks like trouble." Ethan felt ice form in his stomach. Riders who pushed their horses hard were usually bringing bad news rustlers, or trouble with the law, or worse. He glanced at Clara and saw that she'd gone deadly pale, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Take Lila upstairs," he told Clara quietly. "Keep her there until I come get you." Clara nodded, already reaching for the child. But as they moved toward the stairs, she looked back at Ethan with eyes that held fear and something that looked like guilt. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that rider's looking for me, I want you to know that I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, Clara had swept Lila up the stairs and out of sight. He stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the lingering warmth and scent of fresh bread, and wondered what storms were about to break over his carefully ordered world. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats grew closer, and Ethan Hayes prepared to face whatever trouble Clara Whitmore had brought with her to his ranch. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats thundered across the morning stillness like the drumbeat of approaching doom. Ethan grabbed his rifle from beside the door and stepped onto the porch, Tom flanking him with his own weapon ready. The other ranch hands emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, alerted by some invisible signal that trouble was riding hard toward the Hayes ranch. The rider crested the hill at a full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. Even from a distance, Ethan could see this was no casual visitor. The man rode with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing death itself, or perhaps bringing it with him. "You recognize him, boss?" Tom asked, squinting against the morning sun. Ethan shook his head, but something cold settled in his gut. The timing was too convenient, coming so soon after Clara's arrival. Her pale face when Tom had announced the rider, the guilt in her voice when she'd spoken of bringing trouble, this had to be connected to whatever she was running from. The horse and rider thundered into the yard, sending chickens scattering and dust flying. The man pulled up so hard his mount reared hooves pawing the air. He was young, maybe 25, with the lean build of someone who lived in the saddle. His clothes were travel-stained, his face gaunt with exhaustion and something that looked like fear. "You Ethan Hayes?" He called out, his voice hoarse from hard riding. "I am." Ethan kept his rifle ready but not aimed, yet. "And you are?" Name's Johnny Reeves. The young man dismounted on shaking legs, his horse standing with head down, sides heaving. "Rode from Denver fast as I could. There's a man coming this way, and if you're harboring a woman named Clara Whitmore, you're in more danger than you can imagine." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Clara's secrets, whatever they were, had found her. What kind of danger? Johnny's eyes darted around the ranch, taking in the positions of the men, the layout of the buildings, the distance to cover. He was a man accustomed to violence. Ethan realized someone who automatically cataloged escape routes and defensive positions. "The kind that leaves bodies in the ground," Johnny said grimly. "William Cross is coming, and he's bringing death with him." From somewhere in the house came the sound of a window slamming shut. Clara listening from upstairs. Ethan wondered what she was thinking, whether she was considering running again or preparing to face whatever nightmare from her past was riding toward them. "This William Cross," Ethan said carefully. "What's his business with Mrs. Whitmore?" Johnny laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Claims she's his wife. Been hunting her across 3 states, leaving a trail of broken bones and shallow graves behind him. Woman was smart to run, but Cross ain't the kind to give up. He's got the devil's own persistence when he wants something." "Wife." The word echoed in Ethan's mind, raising questions he didn't want to ask. Clara had called herself Mrs. Whitmore, had worn the pale mark of a wedding ring. But if she was married to this Cross, then everything she'd told him was a lie. "How far behind is he?" Tom asked, stepping closer to Ethan's shoulder. "Half a day, maybe less. He's got 4 men with him, all hard cases who'll kill for the promise of whiskey and coin. They'll be here before sunset, sure as sin. 4 armed men against his 3 ranch hands and himself. The odds weren't impossible, but they weren't good either. Especially if they were the kind of men Johnny described, killers with no conscience and nothing to lose." "Why are you warning us?" Ethan asked. "What's Clara Whitmore to you?" Johnny's face softened slightly, and Ethan caught a glimpse of the young man he might have been, before violence hardened him. "She saved my life once in Kansas. Hid me from a lynch mob when I was falsely accused of stealing horses. Gave me food and medicine, never asked for payment or explanation. When I heard Cross was hunting her, I figured I owed her at least a warning." The kitchen door opened, and Clara stepped onto the porch. She moved with the careful grace of someone expecting bullets, her green eyes fixed on Johnny with a mixture of recognition and resignation. "Hello, Johnny," she said quietly. "I was wondering when you'd turn up." "Mrs. Whitmore." Johnny touched his hat brim respectfully. "Wish I was bringing better news." Clara's gaze shifted to Ethan, and he saw in her eyes all the pain and fear she'd been hiding since her arrival. "I suppose you have questions, Mr. Hayes?" "A few," Ethan admitted, his voice harder than he intended. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected, not just the lies, but the way she'd let him begin to care, begin to hope when all along she was bringing danger to his door. "William Cross is my husband," Clara said, the words coming out like splinters of glass. "Legally, anyway. I ran from him 6 months ago, and I've been running ever since." "Why?" The question came out rougher than Ethan meant it to. Clara's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Because he's a monster, Mr. Hayes. Because he broke 3 of my ribs the last time I disappointed him. Because he killed my dog when it tried to protect me from one of his rages. Because I finally realized that staying would mean dying slowly and painfully, while he convinced the whole town I was the crazy one. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Ethan felt something shift inside him, anger replacing betrayal. He'd seen the careful way Clara moved sometimes, the way she positioned herself to see exits, the haunted quality in her eyes. He'd attributed it to the loss of her parents, but now he understood the deeper truth. "The ring mark on your finger," he said softly. "That wasn't from a loving marriage." "No." Clara touched her left hand unconsciously. "It was from a chain. William liked the symbolism, said it reminded me who I belonged to." Johnny shifted uncomfortably clearly, unused to witnessing such intimate revelations. "Ma'am, we don't have much time for explanations. Cross will be here soon, and when he comes, he'll burn this place to the ground if he has to. You need to run now while you still can." "I can't." Clara's voice was steady, but Ethan heard the tremor underneath. "I won't bring more trouble to good people. I've run far enough." "Then you'll die here," Johnny said bluntly, "and likely take these folks with you." Ethan looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing past the fear to the steel underneath. This was a woman who'd found the courage to leave an abusive marriage in an era when wives were considered property. Who'd traveled hundreds of miles alone, facing dangers that would have broken stronger people. Who'd gentled his wild horse and coaxed smiles from his grieving daughter. She wasn't running anymore. Whether from courage or exhaustion, she'd decided to make her stand here on his land with his family. The choice, he realized, was his. "Tom," Ethan said, never taking his eyes off Clara. "Send Billy to town for the sheriff. Tell him to bring every deputy he can muster." "Boss." Tom's voice carried surprise and concern. "You heard me. And get the men armed and positioned. If this Cross wants a fight, we'll give him one." Clara's eyes widened. "Mr. Hayes, you don't understand. William isn't just violent, he's connected. He has friends and law enforcement judges in his pocket. The sheriff might side with him." "Not Sheriff Morrison," Ethan said firmly. "He's an honest man who doesn't hold with wife-beating no matter what the law says about marriage. But even if he doesn't make it in time, we'll handle this ourselves." "You don't owe me anything," Clara said, her voice breaking slightly. "I lied to you, brought danger to your home. You should send me away." Ethan stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes, close enough to smell the lingering scent of cinnamon and vanilla that always seemed to surround her. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "you may have lied about your name and your past, but you didn't lie about who you are. You're the woman who gentled my horse, who brought light back to my daughter's eyes, who bakes bread like it's a prayer. That's worth fighting for." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, the first show of weakness he'd seen from her since her arrival. "He'll kill you. He'll kill all of you. William doesn't lose, Mr. Hayes. He can't bear it." "Then he's never faced a Colorado rancher defending his home," Ethan said grimly. He turned to Johnny. "You riding with us or moving on?" Johnny straightened his hand, moving to the gun at his hip. "Clara Whitmore saved my life. Reckon it's time I returned the favor." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Billy rode out for town, his horse's hoofbeats fading into the distance like a prayer for help that might not come in time. The remaining men cleaned their weapons, checked ammunition, and discussed positions and fields of fire. Clara insisted on helping despite Ethan's protests. She moved through the house, with methodical efficiency gathering medical supplies, preparing bandages, filling every available container with water. Her hands stayed steady, but Ethan noticed the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the way her eyes kept darting to the windows. "Where's Lila?" he asked suddenly, realizing he hadn't seen his daughter since Clara had taken her upstairs. "In the root cellar," Clara replied, not looking up from the medical supplies she was organizing. "I showed her the hidden entrance behind the pantry shelves. Told her it was a game that she needed to stay quiet until we came for her." Ethan felt a stab of gratitude so sharp it was almost pain. Even facing the arrival of her abusive husband, Clara had thought to protect his daughter. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Clara said grimly. "William has a talent for finding what people care about most, then using it against them." As afternoon stretched toward evening, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. Every distant sound, a bird call, the wind through the trees, cattle lowing in the pasture, made everyone jump. Tom positioned himself in the barn loft with a rifle while Johnny took the bunkhouse. The other hand spread out around the property, creating a loose perimeter. Ethan found himself alone with Clara in the kitchen as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. She was making more bread, her hands working the dough with mechanical precision. "Nervous habit?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the bread. Clara's smile was sad. "Something like that. My mother always said that as long as there was bread rising, there was hope for tomorrow." Seemed like good advice for today. The domesticity of the scene, Clara kneading dough while a danger rode toward them, struck Ethan as both absurd and deeply moving. Here was a woman who had faced horrors he couldn't imagine yet. She still found comfort in the simple act of making bread. "Tell me about him," Ethan said. "William Cross." "What are we facing?" Clara's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their rhythm. "He's smart, which makes him dangerous. Charming when he wants to be. He could convince most people that I'm the unstable one, that he's just trying to bring his poor, confused wife home." "But you're not confused." "No." Clara's voice was firm. "I'm many things, scared, tired, desperate, but I'm not confused. I know exactly what William Cross is, and I know what he'll do if he gets me back." "He won't get you back," Ethan said with quiet conviction. "I promise you that." Clara looked up at him, then her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're a good man, Ethan Hayes. Better than I deserve." "Everyone deserves to be safe," Ethan replied. "Everyone deserves to be free." Before Clara could respond, a sharp whistle came from the direction of the barn. Tom's signal that riders were approaching. Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, Clara close behind him. 5 men rode up the valley in loose formation, their horses moving at a steady walk. Even from a distance, there was something predatory about them, like wolves circling wounded prey. The man in the lead was tall and broad-shouldered, sitting his horse with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through force. "That's him," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "William." Ethan studied the approaching riders, noting their positions, their weapons, the way they moved with military precision. These weren't common drifters or small-time criminals. They were professionals, and that made them far more dangerous. "Get to the cellar," Ethan said without turning from the window. "Stay with Lila until this is over." "No." Clara's voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her reflection in the glass. "I won't hide while good people fight my battles." "This isn't your battle anymore," Ethan said firmly. "It's mine. The moment Cross decided to bring violence to my ranch to threaten my family, it became my fight." The riders were close enough now that Ethan could make out individual faces. William Cross was everything he'd expected, and worse, handsome in a cold, classical way, with the kind of smile that probably charmed society ladies and fooled sheriffs. But his eyes were empty as winter sky, and when he looked at the ranch house, Ethan saw hunger there and rage, and the kind of entitlement that destroyed everything it touched. The riders came to a stop 50 yards from the house, well within rifle range, but far enough back to avoid an easy shot. Cross raised one hand in what might have been a peaceful gesture, if not for the gun belt around his waist and the men flanking him. "Ethan Hayes," Cross's voice carried clearly across the yard, cultured and reasonable. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Ethan stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. "I don't have anything of yours, Cross." William's smile was sharp as a blade. "My wife would disagree." "Clara!" His voice rose to a bellow that made the horses shift nervously. "Clara, darling, come out and end this foolishness. You've had your little adventure, but it's time to come home." Silence stretched between the house and the mounted men like a taut wire. Ethan could feel Clara behind him, could sense her struggle between the urge to run and the knowledge that running would only postpone the inevitable. "She's not coming out," Ethan called back, "and she's not going anywhere with you." Cross's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture like a snake coiling before it struck. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your desire to help a lady in distress, but you're interfering in a domestic matter. Clara is my legal wife, and I have every right to take her home." "Legal doesn't make it right," Ethan replied. "And a man who beats his wife doesn't deserve to call himself her husband." The words hit their mark. Cross's facade cracked slightly, revealing the monster underneath. "What lies has she been telling you?" "Clara's always been delicate, prone to hysterics and wild stories. She needs proper care, medical attention. I'm the only one who can provide that. The only care she needs is to be left alone." Cross laughed, the sound carrying no warmth. "Mr. Hayes, you seem like a reasonable man. Surely we can work something out. I'm prepared to be generous, let's say $50 for your trouble plus compensation for any hospitality you may have shown my wife." The implication in his words made Ethan's blood run cold with rage. "Get off my land, now, before I forget my manners." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Cross's voice hardened the mask, finally dropping completely. "You see, Clara has something that belongs to me beyond just her person. She took certain items when she ran family heirlooms, you might say. I want them back." Behind Ethan, Clara made a small sound, surprise, or perhaps recognition. Whatever Cross was talking about, she knew what he meant. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said, but even as the words left his mouth, he wondered what Clara might be carrying that was worth this kind of pursuit. "Papers." Cross set his eyes fixed on the house, as if he could see through the walls to Clara herself. "Legal documents that could prove inconvenient if they fell into the wrong hands. Clara knows what I'm talking about." The kitchen door opened, and Clara stepped onto the porch beside Ethan. Her face was pale but determined, her chin raised in defiance. "Hello, William," she said, her voice carrying across the yard like a challenge. Cross's entire demeanor changed at the sight of her. The cold calculation was replaced by something far more dangerous, obsession possession, and a rage so deep it seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, his voice sickeningly tender. "You look well, Clara. Country life agrees with you." "I look free," Clara replied. "Something you could never stand." Cross's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Freedom is an illusion, darling. You belong to me body and soul. The law says so, God says so, and deep down you know it too." "The only thing I know," Clara said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is that you're a coward who can only feel powerful by hurting people smaller than yourself. You're pathetic, William. You always were." The words hit Cross like a physical slap. His face flushed dark red and his hand moved toward his gun. "Careful," Ethan warned, raising his rifle slightly. Around the ranch he could sense his men tensing fingers, moving to triggers. Cross forced his hand away from his weapon, but the effort clearly cost him. "You've turned my wife against me," he said to Ethan, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Filled her head with lies and false hopes." "I didn't have to turn her against anything," Ethan replied. "You did that all by yourself." "Last chance, Hayes. Send Clara out along with what she stole from me, and we'll ride away peaceful. Otherwise—" Cross gestured to his men, all of whom had their hands on their weapons. "Otherwise what?" Ethan asked, his voice deadly calm. "You'll shoot up my ranch, kill innocent people, that the kind of man you want everyone to know you are." "I'm the kind of man who takes what's his," Cross snarled. "And Clara is mine. The papers are mine. Everything she took is mine by right of law and marriage." "What papers?" Ethan asked quietly, directing the question to Clara. Clara was silent for a long moment, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Documents proving that William murdered his first wife, and his business partner, and probably others. I found them hidden in his office, safe-copied them before I ran." The words dropped into the silence like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of understanding through everyone present. Suddenly Cross's pursuit made perfect sense. This wasn't just about retrieving a runaway wife, it was about silencing the one person who could destroy him. "That's quite an accusation," Cross said, his voice deceptively calm. But Ethan could see the truth in his eyes, the cold calculation of a man deciding how many people he needed to kill to keep his secrets safe. "It's not an accusation," Clara said firmly. "It's a fact. I have the proof, William, all of it. Every forged document, every bribed official, every convenient accident that eliminated your enemies." Cross's facade cracked completely, revealing the monster that had been hiding underneath. "You always were too smart for your own good, Clara. It's going to get you killed." "Maybe," Clara agreed. "But at least I won't die as your victim." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, two sides measuring each other across 50 yards of dusty ground. Ethan could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip toward violence at the slightest provocation. That's when the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the eastern trail. Multiple riders moving fast, but not with the desperate urgency of Cross's arrival. Help perhaps in the form of Sheriff Morrison and his deputies. Cross heard them too, his head turning toward the sound. For the first time since his arrival, uncertainty flickered across his features. Whatever crimes he'd committed, whatever influence he wielded, the arrival of law enforcement complicated his plans considerably. "Seems like this conversation is about to get more interesting." Ethan observed, a grim smile touching his lips. The approaching riders crested the hill, and Ethan felt a surge of relief. Sheriff Morrison rode in the lead, flanked by 3 deputies, all armed and looking grimly determined. Billy must have convinced them of the seriousness of the situation. Cross watched the lawmen approach with the careful attention of a predator reassessing its prey. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to its earlier reasonable tone. "Sheriff Morrison," he called out as the lawman drew near. "Perfect timing. I'm here to retrieve my wife, who's been led astray by this rancher's false promises." Morrison was a lean, weathered man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He looked from Cross to Ethan, to Clara, taking in the tense positioning, the ready weapons, the fear that hung in the air like smoke. "That's so." Morrison's voice was non-committal. "And what makes you think she wants to be retrieved?" "She's my legal wife," Cross replied smoothly. "And she's not well, Sheriff. Prone to hysteria and delusions. She needs proper medical care, not the false sympathy of strangers." Morrison's gaze shifted to Clara, and Ethan saw recognition flicker in the sheriff's eyes. "Ma'am, you got something to say about that?" Clara stepped forward, her head held high, despite the fear that Ethan could see in the slight tremor of her hands. "Sheriff Morrison, I'm Clara Whitmore, and I'm asking for your protection. My husband is a violent man who's threatened to kill me if I don't return with him." "Now, Clara?" Cross said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone dealing with a difficult child. "You know that's not true. You're just upset, confused." "I'm not confused," Clara interrupted firmly, "and I have proof of William's crimes, documents that show he murdered his first wife and made it look like an accident. Evidence of bribes paid to officials of witnesses who disappeared after they became inconvenient." Cross's mask slipped again, revealing the cold fury underneath. "Sheriff, my wife has been under tremendous strain. She's clearly delusional. Where's this proof?" Morrison interrupted, his attention focused on Clara. Clara reached into her bodice and pulled out a small leather packet carefully wrapped in oiled cloth. Copies of documents from William's safe. Financial records, correspondence, even a confession he wrote, but never intended to send. Cross's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when 3 rifle barrels swung his way. Morrison, Ethan, and Tom all had him covered, their faces grim with purpose. "I'd think real careful about your next move, Cross," Morrison said quietly. "Lot of witnesses here, lot of guns pointed your way." For a moment that stretched like eternity, Cross balanced on the edge of violence. His men shifted nervously, hands hovering near weapons, but clearly unwilling to start a fight they couldn't win. The odds had shifted dramatically with the arrival of the law. Then Cross smiled, and Ethan felt ice form in his stomach. It was the smile of a man who held cards no one else had seen. "Sheriff Trass Nasamram," Cross said conversationally. "I wonder if you're aware that you're harboring a wanted criminal. Clara Whitmore, or Clara Cross, as she's legally known, is wanted for theft, adultery, and the murder of a business associate of mine in Kansas." The words hit like lightning strikes, changing everything in an instant. Morrison's expression shifted from sympathy to suspicion, his rifle lowering slightly as doubt crept in. "That's a lie," Clara said desperately, but Ethan could hear the fear in her voice. "William, you can't—" "I have warrants," Cross continued smoothly, reaching into his coat with exaggerated care. "Signed by Judge Harrison in Kansas, witnessed and sealed. Clara is a fugitive from justice, Sheriff. It's your duty to turn her over to me." Morrison examined the documents Cross handed him, his weathered face troubled. Legal papers were legal papers, and a sheriff who ignored them could find himself on the wrong side of the law. "These look legitimate," Morrison said reluctantly. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to—" The rest of his words were lost in the thunder of gunfire as Cross's men opened up their shots, carefully aimed to wound rather than kill. Morrison spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. One of his deputies crumpled with a leg wound, while the others scrambled for cover behind their horses. In the chaos of the ambush, Cross spurred his horse forward, his own gun drawn and trained on Clara. "Enough games," he snarled. "Clara, you're coming with me now, or I start putting bullets in everyone you care about." Ethan swung his rifle toward Cross, but the outlaw was ready for him. His shot took Ethan high in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the porch boards. Clara screamed and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against the wound as blood seeped between her fingers. "Touching." Cross sneered, dismounting and walking toward the porch with his gun trained on them. The great protector brought low by a single bullet. "How does it feel, Hayes, knowing that your noble gesture got you killed?" Ethan tried to speak, tried to lift his rifle, but his strength was flowing out with his blood. Clara's face swam in and out of focus above him, her tears falling like rain on his cheeks. "Please," Clara begged, looking up at Cross with desperate eyes. I'll come with you. I'll do whatever you want. Just let me help him first." "Oh, you'll come with me regardless," Cross said with cruel satisfaction. "But first, I think Mr. Hayes needs to understand the consequences of interfering with my property." He raised his gun, aiming it directly at Ethan's head. Clara threw herself across Ethan's body, shielding him with her own flesh. "No!" she screamed. "William, please!" Cross's finger tightened on the trigger, his eyes bright with the anticipation of violence. Around the ranch, gunfire continued as his men kept the surviving lawmen and ranch hands pinned down. It seemed like nothing could stop the inevitable execution. That's when Zeus appeared. The black stallion came around the corner of the house like a force of nature, his hooves striking sparks from the hard ground. Somehow, in the chaos of the gunfight, he'd broken free from his corral, and now he charged toward Cross with the fury of a creature that had finally found a target worthy of his rage. Cross spun toward the sound, his gun swinging away from Ethan just as Zeus crashed into him. Horse and man went down in a tangle of limbs and fury, Cross's screams mixing with the stallion's wild neighing. When the dust settled, Cross lay motionless on the ground, his neck bent at an impossible angle. The gunfire around the ranch sputtered and died as Cross's men, seeing their leader dead, lost their stomach for the fight. One by one they threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Clara pressed her hands harder against Ethan's wound, her voice a desperate litany of prayer and pleading. "Stay with me, Ethan. Please stay with me. Don't you dare die on me now." Ethan tried to smile, tried to tell her that it was worth it, that seeing her free was worth any price. But darkness was closing in around the edges of his vision, and his strength was fading like mist in the morning sun. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was Clara's face streaked with tears and blood, beautiful and fierce, and finally truly free. In the distance, like an echo from another world, he heard the sound of a child crying. Lila calling for her papa, her voice breaking through the silence that had held her captive for so long. She was speaking again. Whatever else happened, his little bird had found her voice. It was enough. It had to be enough. The sound of Lila's voice calling "Papa, Papa" cut through the settling dust and gunpowder smoke like a blade through Clara's heart. She pressed harder against Ethan's wound, feeling his life seeping warm and red between her fingers, while somewhere behind her, a child who had been silent for 2 years was finally finding her voice in the midst of tragedy. "Don't you leave her," Clara whispered fiercely to Ethan's pale, unconscious face. "Don't you dare leave that little girl without her father. She needs you. We both need you." Sheriff Morrison struggled to his feet, his left arm hanging useless at his side, blood soaking through his shirt. "Doc Henderson," he called to one of his deputies who was binding a leg wound. "Someone needs to ride for Doc Henderson in town, fast as you can manage." "I'll go," Johnny Reeves volunteered, appearing beside them with his hat in his hands and genuine concern etched across his young features. "My horse is still fresh." Morrison nodded grimly. "Tell him we've got 2 men shot bad, maybe more. And Johnny?" The deputy paused. "Tell him to bring everything he's got. This ain't no time for half measures." As Johnny sprinted toward his horse, Clara became aware of small arms wrapping around her waist from behind. Lila had somehow emerged from the root cellar and found her way to the porch. Her face streaked with tears and dirt, her voice a constant heartbroken litany. "Papa, wake up. Please wake up, Papa. Clara, make him wake up." The trust in that small voice, the assumption that Clara could somehow fix what seemed irreparably broken, nearly shattered her composure entirely. She reached back with one bloody hand to touch Lila's hair, never lifting pressure from Ethan's chest. "He's going to be okay, sweetheart," Clara said, praying desperately that she wasn't lying. Your papa's strong. He's going to fight, and he's going to come back to us." Tom appeared beside them, his own face grim with worry. "How bad is it?" Clara examined the wound as best she could without moving Ethan. "The bullet's still in there, high in the chest. Missed his heart, thank God, but it's close to his lung. He's lost a lot of blood." "What can we do?" "Keep pressure on the wound. Get me clean cloth, boiling water, and whiskey, lots of whiskey. And find me something I can use as bandages." Clara's voice carried the authority of someone who'd tended wounds before, though she didn't elaborate on where she'd gained such knowledge. Tom nodded and hurried inside. Around them, the surviving deputies were securing Cross's men, binding their hands and reading them their rights. The violence was over, but its consequences were just beginning. Clara looked down at William's body, twisted and still in the dust, where Zeus had left him. She felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice served, only emptiness and the weight of all the destruction he'd caused in pursuit of his twisted obsession. "Is the bad man dead?" Lila whispered, her voice so small Clara could barely hear it. "Yes, sweetheart. He can't hurt anyone anymore." Lila nodded solemnly, then pressed closer to Clara's side. "Will Papa die too?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy with a 7-year-old's understanding that death was real and permanent and could steal away the people you loved most. Clara thought of Margaret Hayes, of how this child had already lost one parent to forces beyond anyone's control. "I won't let that happen," Clara said, surprised by the fierce conviction in her own voice. "I promise you, Lila, I won't let your papa leave us." Tom returned with the supplies Clara had requested, along with Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring ranch, who'd ridden over when she heard the gunshots. The older woman took one look at the situation and immediately took charge of Leela, drawing the child away from the bloody scene while Clara worked. "Come on, dear one," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "Let's get you cleaned up and find you something to eat. Clara needs room to help your father." "I want to stay with Papa," Lila protested, but her voice carried more exhaustion than defiance. "You can help him best by staying strong and being brave," Clara said, looking up from her work. "Can you do that for me? Can you be my brave helper?" Lila nodded seriously, allowing Mrs. Patterson to lead her away. Clara watched them go, her heart aching for the child's pain, before turning her full attention back to Ethan. Working by touch and instinct, she cleaned the wound as best she could, probing gently for the bullet. It was lodged deep, too deep for her to reach safely without proper tools. All she could do was stop the bleeding and wait for the doctor. "Come on, Ethan," she murmured as she worked. "You can't give up now. Not when Lila's finally talking again. She's going to have so much to tell you when you wake up." Sheriff Morrison approached his wounded arm, now bound in a makeshift sling. "Mrs. Whitmore, or should I say, Mrs. Cross, I reckon we need to talk." Clara looked up from Ethan's still form, seeing the conflict in Morrison's weathered face. Legal duty, warring with human compassion, the letter of the law, battling against obvious justice. "I understand, Sheriff. You have those warrants." Morrison pulled the papers from his pocket, staring at them with obvious distaste. "Funny thing about warrants. Man gets to wondering about their authenticity when the fellow who presented them gets himself killed trying to shoot up a ranch full of innocent people." He held the documents over the lamp Tom had brought out, watching as they caught fire and crumbled to ash. "Far as I'm concerned, these were forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Don't suppose you'd know anything about that?" Clara felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "William was very good at forging documents, Sheriff. It was one of his many talents." "Figured as much." Morrison scattered the ashes with his boot. "Those other documents you mentioned, the ones proving Cross's crimes, you still have those?" Clara nodded toward her bodice, where the leather packet remained hidden. "Everything's there. Names, dates, methods. Enough to clear the names of several people he framed over the years." "Good. Justice delayed ain't always justice denied." Morrison looked down at Ethan, his expression troubled. "How's he doing?" "Holding on," Clara replied, though Ethan's breathing seemed more labored than before, his face gray with blood loss. "Where's that doctor?" As if summoned by her words, the thunder of approaching hooves announced Johnny's return with Doc Henderson. The elderly physician dismounted before his horse had fully stopped his medical bag, already in hand. "How long's he been unconscious?" Henderson asked, dropping to his knees beside Ethan without preamble. 20 minutes, maybe longer," Clara replied reluctantly, lifting her hands away from the wound. Henderson examined Ethan with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands gentle but thorough. "Bullets lodged against a rib, probably deflected from the bone. Good news is it missed the major blood vessels. Bad news is it's sitting awful close to his lung." "Can you get it out?" Clara asked. "I can try, but I'll need good light, clean space, and someone with steady hands to assist." Henderson looked around the chaotic ranch yard, then toward the house. "Kitchen table work for you?" Clara nodded, already mentally preparing the space. "Tom helped me get him inside, careful with his head and shoulders." Moving Ethan proved to be a delicate operation. He was a big man, dead weight in unconsciousness, and every jostle brought fresh seepage from his wound. But they managed to get him onto the kitchen table, his body illuminated by every lamp and candle they could gather. Henderson rolled up his sleeves and began laying out his instruments. "Mrs. Cross, Whitmore," Clara corrected firmly. "Clara Whitmore. William Cross was never legally my husband. Our marriage was performed by one of his criminal associates, posing as a preacher." Henderson raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "Mrs. Whitmore, then. Have you assisted with surgery before?" Clara hesitated. Memories she'd tried to bury, threatening to surface. "Some. During the war. I helped tend wounded soldiers in a field hospital in Virginia." "Good. Then you know what we're facing." Henderson poured whiskey over his hands and instruments, the sharp smell filling the kitchen. "This is going to take everything I've got, and some luck besides." "You ready for that?" Clara looked down at Ethan's pale face, thinking of Lila's tear-streaked cheeks, of the bread still rising in covered bowls on the counter, of the fragile hope that had begun to bloom in this kitchen before violence shattered it. "I'm ready," she said. The surgery was a nightmare of blood and whispered prayers of holding Ethan down, when his body fought the probing instruments of watching his breathing grow shallower as Henderson worked to extract the bullet from its resting place against his ribs. "There," Henderson breathed, finally holding up a misshapen piece of lead. "Got the bastard." Clara released the breath she'd been holding as the doctor began the careful process of cleaning and stitching the wound. Ethan's color was still terrible, his breathing shallow, but his pulse seemed stronger under her fingers. "Will he live?" she asked. Henderson wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of blood across his skin. "If infection doesn't set in, if his lung stays clear, if he's got the will to fight, then yes, I think he will. But it's going to be touch and go for a while. Someone needs to stay with him, watch for fever, keep the wound clean." "I'll do it," Clara said without hesitation. "It could be days before he's out of danger, weeks before he's back on his feet." "I said I'll do it." Henderson studied her face, seeing something there that satisfied him. "All right then. I'll check on him tomorrow, bring more supplies. Keep that wound dry. Give him water if he'll take it, and send for me immediately if his breathing changes or if fever sets in." As the doctor packed his instruments, Clara became aware of voices from the front room. Mrs. Patterson was reading to Lila, her warm voice weaving a story about brave princesses and loyal horses. The sound of the child's occasional question spoken aloud instead of trapped in silence was like music. "She's talking again," Henderson observed, following Clara's gaze toward the sound. "Started during the shooting. Fear and shock sometimes break barriers that grief builds." Lucky thing. Girl's been carrying too much sorrow for someone so young. Henderson paused at the kitchen door. You know, Mrs. Whitmore, this family's been through hell these past few years. They don't need any more heartbreak. Clara met his eyes steadily. They won't get it from me, Doctor. Not if I can help it. Henderson nodded and left, taking Sheriff Morrison and the surviving deputies with him. The prisoners were loaded into a wagon bound for the county jail, while Cross's body was wrapped in canvas for burial in the town cemetery's potter's field. As quiet settled over the ranch, Clara found herself alone with Ethan in the lamplit kitchen. She pulled a chair close to the table and settled in for what she knew would be a long vigil. Ethan lay still as death, his breathing so shallow. She had to watch carefully to see the rise and fall of his chest. His face, normally weathered and strong, looked vulnerable in the flickering light, younger somehow, as if pain had stripped away the armor he wore against the world. Clara took his hand in hers, noting the calluses that spoke of years of hard work, the strength that even unconsciousness couldn't entirely diminish. You fight, Ethan Hayes, she whispered. You fight for Lila, and you fight for this ranch, and you fight for all the tomorrows that are waiting for us. The night stretched on endlessly. Clara dozed fitfully in her chair, starting awake every few minutes to check Ethan's breathing, to feel for fever, to watch for any sign of change. Around 3 a.m, Lila appeared in the doorway, her small nightgown ghostly in the lamplight. I couldn't sleep, the child said, her voice still carrying the wonder of rediscovered speech. Is Papa better? Clara held out her arm, and Lila ran to her, climbing into her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. He's fighting, sweetheart. Fighting to get better so he can hear your beautiful voice. I dreamed about Mama, Lila said softly. She told me Papa needed me to be brave, and that she wasn't sad anymore because you're here to take care of us. Clara felt tears threaten at the simple acceptance in the child's words. Your Mama sounds very wise. She was. She used to make bread like you do, but yours tastes different. Better, maybe. Like it has more love in it. All bread has love in it if it's made right. Your Mama's bread was full of love for you and your Papa. Lila considered this seriously. Will you teach me to make bread like you do, the kind that helps people feel better? I'd be honored to teach you, Clara replied, stroking the child's silky hair. But right now, the best thing we can do for your Papa is to stay close and keep believing he'll get better. They sat together through the small hours of the morning, Lila eventually falling asleep in Clara's arms, while Clara maintained her vigil over Ethan. As dawn light began to creep through the kitchen windows, painting the familiar room in shades of gold and rose, Clara allowed herself to hope that the worst was behind them. That hope nearly shattered when Ethan's breathing suddenly changed, becoming rapid and shallow. His forehead burned with fever under Clara's touch. And when she pulled back the bandages to check his wound, she saw the telltale redness that meant infection was setting in. No, she whispered desperately. Not now. Not when we've come this far. She gently moved Lila to a chair, covering her with a kitchen towel, then set about fighting for Ethan's life. Cool cloths to bring down the fever, careful cleaning of the wound with whiskey and boiled water, spoonfuls of willow bark tea forced between his lips when delirium made him thrash and mutter. Hour after hour, Clara battled the infection that threatened to claim him. She changed his bandages, bathed his fevered skin, and talked to him constantly about Lila's progress, about the bread that still waited to be baked, about the future they could have if he would just keep fighting. You can't leave her, Clara pleaded during one particularly bad spell when Ethan's fever spiked and his breathing became labored. She's talking again, Ethan. She's asking questions and telling stories, and being the little girl she was before grief silenced her. You have to wake up to hear her voice. As if summoned by her words, Lila appeared beside the table, her small hand reaching out to touch her father's burning forehead. Papa, she said clearly, her voice carrying all the love and need of a child who'd already lost too much. Papa, please don't go to heaven with Mama. I need you here with me. For a moment, Ethan's restless movement stilled. His breathing seemed to steady, his fever-bright face relaxing into something approaching peace. Clara held her breath, watching for any sign of improvement. Then his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but unmistakably aware. Lila. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked from fever and pain. I'm here, Papa. Lila's face lit up with pure joy. I'm here and I'm talking again. Clara helped me find my voice. Ethan's gaze shifted to Clara, confusion and gratitude warring in his fever-bright eyes. You stayed. I promised I would, Clara replied simply. Both of you needed me to stay. Ethan tried to sit up, winced at the pain, and allowed Clara to help him settle back against the pillows they'd arranged on the table. Cross, dead, Clara said. Zeus killed him. The stallion broke free during the fight and, well, let's just say William won't be bothering anyone anymore. Ethan's eyes closed in relief. The papers, the evidence, safe. Sheriff Morrison's going to make sure the right people see them. William's crimes won't stay buried. Good. Ethan's voice was growing stronger, though he was clearly exhausted. And are you free? Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks at the simple question, free. After so many months of running, of looking over her shoulder, of living in constant fear, she was finally truly free. Yes, she whispered. Thanks to you, I'm free. Lila climbed carefully onto the edge of the table, settling herself beside her father with the casual affection of a child who'd reclaimed her place in the world. Papa, Clara makes the best bread, and she's going to teach me how. And she helped me remember how to talk, and she took care of you when you were sick, and I think we should keep her. Ethan's laugh was weak but genuine. Keep her like a stray cat. Like family, Lila corrected with 7-year-old seriousness. Because that's what she is. Now, isn't she, family? Clara felt her heart stop, then start again with a rhythm that seemed to match the cadence of Ethan's name. Family. She'd lost her parents, fled from a marriage that was based on violence and lies. Spent months thinking she'd never have a place to belong again. But here in this kitchen that smelled of bread and hope, with this man who'd risked his life to protect her, and this child who'd found her voice again in the midst of chaos, here she was home. Clara. Ethan's voice was questioning, uncertain. What Lila said about keeping you. I know you were planning to move on, save money for California, but what? Clara prompted gently. Ethan struggled to find the words, his fevered mind clearly working to express something important. But I was hoping, that is, if you wanted, maybe you could stay. Not as hired help, as more than that. Clara looked at this man who'd defended her without question, who'd been willing to die for her freedom, who was now offering her something she'd thought was lost forever, a real home, a real family, a chance at happiness. Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Hayes? She asked softly. I'm asking you to give us a chance, Ethan replied, his blue eyes clear and honest, despite his weakness. All three of us, to see what we could build together. Clara looked around the kitchen that had become her sanctuary, at the bread, rising in its bowls, at the child who'd claimed her as family, at the man who'd shown her what real love looked like, protective without being possessive, strong without being violent, steady as the mountains that surrounded their valley. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. Lila clapped her hands in delight, her laughter ringing through the kitchen like church bells. Are you going to marry us right away? Can I help plan the wedding? Can we have your special bread at the party? Clara and Ethan exchanged glances over the child's head, both smiling at her enthusiasm. "Slow down, little bird," Ethan said, using the pet name that had once made Lila giggle and now did so again. "Let your old papa heal up first. Then we'll talk about weddings and parties. But you will marry Clara, promise." Ethan reached out with his good arm, taking Clara's hand in his. His grip was weak, but sure, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I promise, Lila. If Clara will have us, we'll make this official as soon as the preacher can get here." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "I'll have you both," she said, "for as long as you'll have me." "Forever, then," Lila declared with the absolute certainty of a child. That's how long families stay together. Forever. As if to celebrate her words, the smell of perfectly risen bread began to fill the kitchen. Clara's loaves, forgotten in the chaos of the night, were ready for the oven. She reluctantly released Ethan's hand and moved to check them, finding the dough exactly as it should be, golden elastic, full of promise. "Time to bake," she announced, beginning to shape the loaves with practiced hands. "Fresh bread for a fresh start." Ethan watched her work, noting the grace in her movements. The way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the gentle smile that had replaced the haunted look she'd worn since her arrival. This woman who'd come to them as a stranger, carrying secrets and sorrow, had become the heart of his home in a matter of days. "Clara," he said softly. She looked up from her shaping flour, dusting her hands and apron. "Yes. Thank you for staying, for fighting for us, for bringing light back to this house." Clara's smile was radiant as sunrise. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay, for showing me what it means to be protected instead of possessed, for letting me be part of your family." As she slid the loaves into the oven, the kitchen filled with warmth and the promise of good things to come. Outside, the ranch was coming alive with the sounds of a new day. Cattle lowing horses, nickering men calling to each other as they began their work. Inside, a healing man, a recovered child, and a woman who'd found her home waited for bread to rise and love to grow. The silence that had held them all captive was finally truly broken. The scent of fresh bread rising in the oven seemed to mark the beginning of their new life together. But the path to that future proved longer and more winding than any of them had expected. Ethan's recovery was slow, marked by setbacks that left Clara pacing the kitchen floor at midnight, and days when fever returned with vengeance, stealing his strength and clouding his mind with delirium. During one particularly difficult week in October, when infection threatened the wound site again and Doc Henderson rode out twice in 3 days, Clara found herself questioning every decision, every treatment, every prayer whispered in the dark hours before dawn. "He's not getting better?" she confessed to Mrs. Patterson, who'd become a regular visitor and unofficial grandmother to Lila. The older woman found Clara in the garden behind the house, mechanically pulling weeds from between the late vegetables with hands that shook from exhaustion. "Healing's not a straight line, dear," Mrs. Patterson said gently, settling her ample frame on the wooden bench Ethan had built years ago for Margaret. "Sometimes a body needs to go backward before it can go forward. The question is, are you prepared for the long haul?" Clara sat back on her heels, dirt staining her apron, and looked toward the house where Lila was reading aloud to her father, a daily ritual that seemed to anchor them both. "I don't know how to be anything but prepared. I've been fighting for survival so long, I'm not sure I remember how to just live." "Then it's time you learned," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Because that little girl needs someone who's living, not just surviving. And when Ethan gets his strength back, and he will, he's going to need a woman who knows how to be happy, not just grateful to be alive." The wisdom in those words took root slowly, like seeds planted in winter soil. Clara began to notice things she'd been too afraid or too tired to see. The way Lila's laugh had returned in full force, bright and musical as wind chimes. The way the ranch hands touched their hats respectfully when they passed her in the yard, accepting her not as a temporary guest, but as the woman of the house. The way Ethan's eyes followed her movements, even when fever clouded his thoughts, as if she were his anchor to the living world. By November, when the first snow dusted the peaks and the aspen leaves had turned to gold, Ethan was finally strong enough to sit up without assistance. Clara found him one morning trying to get out of bed, his face pale with determination and the effort of moving muscles that had grown weak during his long convalescence. "And just where do you think you're going?" she asked, hands on her hips in mock sternness. "To check on Zeus," Ethan replied, swaying slightly as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Tom says the horse won't let anyone near him since what happened. I need to see if I can gentle him again." Clara moved to his side, steadying him with gentle hands. "Zeus can wait another week. You're barely strong enough to walk to the kitchen, let alone handle a traumatized horse." "Clara." Ethan's voice carried a note she'd learned to recognize, the stubborn tone of a man who'd been flat on his back for 2 months and was chafing at his helplessness. "I need to do this. That horse saved our lives. The least I can do is make sure he's not suffering for it." Looking into his blue eyes, Clara saw not just determination, but something deeper: the need to reclaim his place as protector and provider, to prove to himself that he was still the man he'd been before a bullet had laid him low. She understood that Need had felt it herself during the dark months of her marriage, when William's abuse had made her question her own strength and worth. "All right," she said finally, "but I'm coming with you. And if you so much as sway, we're heading straight back to bed." Ethan's smile was weak but genuine. "Yes, ma'am." The walk to the corral took 3 times longer than it should have, with frequent stops for Ethan to catch his breath and lean heavily on Clara's shoulder. But when they finally reached Zeus's enclosure, the effort proved worthwhile. The great black stallion stood in the far corner, his coat dull from lack of proper grooming, his head hanging low. When he saw Ethan, his ears pricked forward, and he took a tentative step closer to the fence. "Hello, boy," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone Clara remembered from that first day when she'd calmed the horse with song. "I hear you've been giving the boys trouble." Zeus whickered softly, a sound that spoke of confusion and trauma. The horse had saved them, had acted on some deep instinct that recognized Cross as a threat. But the violence of that day had marked him as surely as it had marked them all. "He won't eat properly," Tom said, approaching from the barn. "Takes just enough to stay alive, but he's lost weight. Doc Henderson says some animals get melancholy after violence, same as people." Clara studied the stallion, noting the way he held himself apart, the dullness in eyes that had once blazed with wild fire. An idea began to form in her mind, born from her own experience with trauma and healing. "What if we brought him closer to the house?" she suggested. "Put him in the smaller corral where he can see people coming and going, hear voices and laughter. Sometimes isolation makes the darkness worse." Ethan looked at her with interest. "You think that would help?" "I think he needs to remember that not all human contact leads to violence. Just like—" She paused, the words catching in her throat. "Just like you did," Ethan finished, gently, understanding immediately. Clara nodded, surprised by how easily he read the parallel between her own healing and the horse's trauma. "It took time for me to trust that your voice wouldn't be followed by a blow, that kindness wasn't just a prelude to cruelty. Maybe Zeus needs the same kind of patient reassurance." They moved the stallion that afternoon, a delicate process that required all hands and considerable patience. But once Zeus was settled in the corral closest to the house, where he could observe the daily rhythms of ranch life, the change was gradual but noticeable. Lila was the first to befriend him again. Despite Clara's initial concerns about safety, the child seemed to understand instinctively that the horse needed gentleness, not force. Each morning after breakfast, she would sit on the porch with her primer, reading aloud in her clear, sweet voice, while Zeus grazed nearby. "He likes stories," she announced to Clara one crisp December morning, "especially the ones about brave knights and fair maidens. I think he sees himself as a knight who rescued us from the dragon." Clara smiled at the child's interpretation, but there was wisdom in it. Zeus had indeed been their unlikely champion, arriving at the moment when all seemed lost. Perhaps thinking of himself as a hero rather than a victim was exactly what the horse needed for his own healing. The winter months settled into a rhythm of quiet domesticity that felt like a miracle after the chaos of autumn. Clara established herself as the undisputed heart of the household, her authority in the kitchen expanding naturally to encompass the smooth running of the entire ranch. She managed accounts, planned meals for the ranch hands, organized repairs and improvements with the efficiency of a woman born to the task. But it was in the smaller moments that her true value became apparent. The way she could coax Lila through difficult arithmetic lessons with games and stories. The way she sat beside Ethan on painful days, reading to him or simply holding his hand while he dozed. The way she remembered each ranch hand's preferences for coffee and made sure there was always something sweet waiting after a long day's work. "You've transformed this place," Ethan told her one evening in late January as they sat before the fire, Lila asleep between them with her head on Clara's lap. "It's not just clean and organized, it feels alive again." Clara stroked the child's golden hair, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "It was always alive, Ethan. It just needed someone to tend it properly." "Like Zeus. Like all of us," Clara replied softly. "We were all wounded, all hiding in our own ways. Sometimes healing requires nothing more complicated than consistent kindness and the patience to wait for trust to grow." Ethan reached across Lila's sleeping form to take Clara's free hand. His grip was strong now, the wasted weakness of illness replaced by renewed health. "I love you," he said simply. "I know I should have said it before, should have made it clear that this isn't just gratitude or convenience. I love you, Clara Whitmore, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of the gift you've given us." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple honesty of his declaration. "I love you too," she whispered. "Both of you. This life, this home, I never dared hope for anything so perfect." "Then marry me," Ethan said, his voice urgent with sudden decision. "Not someday when I'm fully healed, not when the weather's better or the ranch work is caught up. Marry me now, Clara. Make this family official before another day passes." Clara looked down at Lila, then around the parlor that had become her sanctuary. Every corner held memories, now shared meals, quiet conversations, moments of laughter and healing. This was home in a way she'd never experienced before, and the man beside her was offering to make it permanent. "Yes," she said, the word coming out on a breath of pure joy. "Yes, Ethan Hayes. I'll marry you whenever you say." The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a crystalline February morning when the snow lay thick on the ground, but the sun blazed with the promise of coming spring. Preacher Williams rode out from town, despite the cold, bringing with him Sheriff Morrison and Doc Henderson as witnesses. Clara had spent days preparing not just for the ceremony, but for the celebration afterward. The kitchen was filled with the fruits of her labor. Fresh bread shaped into intricate braids, a cake that rivaled anything from the finest bakery in Denver, and enough food to feed the small crowd that had gathered to witness their union. She wore Margaret's wedding dress, altered carefully to fit her smaller frame. The gesture had been Ethan's idea, offered hesitantly as a way to honor his first wife's memory while celebrating his future with Clara. "She would have wanted you to have it," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. Margaret always believed that love should be celebrated, that joy should be shared. She would have loved you, Clara. Would have been grateful to know that Lila has someone who cares for her, the way a mother should. Standing before the preacher in the parlor that had been decorated with pine boughs and early winter roses from Mrs. Patterson's greenhouse, Clara felt the weight of that legacy and the promise of the future pressing down on her shoulders. But it was a good weight, the kind that anchored rather than burdened. Do you, Ethan Joseph Hayes, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Preacher Williams intoned his voice, carrying the gravity of the vows being exchanged. I do, Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live. And do you, Clara Marie Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara thought of all the miles she'd traveled to reach this moment, all the fear and pain and desperate hope that had led her to this ranch, to this family, to this love that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. I do, she said, her voice clear and strong. With all my heart, for all my life. When Ethan kissed her, sealing their union, Lila cheered and Zeus nickered from his corral as if the entire ranch were celebrating their happiness. Later, Clara would remember that moment as the exact instant when her old life ended and her new one truly began. The celebration afterward was everything a frontier wedding should be, loud, joyful, and filled with the kind of genuine warmth that made even strangers feel like family. The ranch hands had cleaned up and put on their best clothes. Mrs. Patterson had contributed her famous apple cider, and even some of the neighboring ranchers had made the journey through the snow to join the festivities. But it was during the quieter moments, when the crowd had thinned and the dishes were being cleared away, that Clara felt the full impact of what she'd gained. Sitting beside her new husband while Lila dozed in her lap, watching their friends and neighbors laugh and talk around the fire, she experienced a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. Happy? Ethan asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Terrified, Clara admitted with a laugh. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this all to be too good to be true. It's real, Ethan assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. We're real. This family, this love, it's as real as bread rising in the oven or snow on the mountains. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Clara. You're home. Home. The word had taken on new meaning over the past months, expanding beyond mere shelter, to encompass safety, love, and belonging. Clara had spent so much of her life running from poverty, from abuse, from the limitations that society placed on women who dared to want more than mere survival. But here in this house with these people, she'd finally found a place worth staying for. Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow by March and coaxing green shoots from the still frozen ground. With the warmer weather came new energy, new projects, and new additions to the Hayes family. The first addition was Zeus's foal sired before the stallion's trauma and born to one of the ranch mares in April. The little colt was black as midnight, like his father, but with white markings that gave him an almost magical appearance. Lila named him Starlight and appointed herself his primary caretaker. He's going to be just like Zeus, she declared, watching the foal nurse, while his father looked on with what could only be described as pride. Strong and brave and ready to protect people he loves. Clara smiled at the child's confidence, noting how the birth of new life had seemed to complete Zeus's own healing. The stallion was still wary of strangers, but his coat gleamed with health again, and his eyes held their old fire. Sometimes trauma left scars, but sometimes it also revealed strength that might otherwise have remained hidden. The second edition came in late May, when a young woman named Sarah Mitchell arrived at the ranch with her 2 small children and a story that was all too familiar. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her destitute and desperate. She'd heard about Clara's kindness from someone in town and had walked 15 miles, hoping for work and shelter. I can cook and clean, Sarah said, standing in the kitchen doorway with her sleeping baby in her arms while her 4-year-old son peered out from behind her skirts. "I don't eat much, and I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. Please, Mrs. Hayes, I have nowhere else to go." Clara looked at the woman, barely 25, but aged by hardship, her clothes clean, but patched, her children thin, but well cared for, and saw herself 6 months earlier. Desperate, alone, clinging to pride, when pride was all she had left. "Can you bake bread?" Clara asked. Sarah's face lit up with hope. "Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me before she passed. I'm not as good as you, but I can manage basic loaves and biscuits." "Then you're hired," Clara said without consulting Ethan. "The bunkhouse has an empty room at the end that we can fix up for you and the children. It's not much, but it's clean and warm." "Clara," Ethan said gently from the doorway, "are you sure we can afford another mouth to feed?" Clara turned to face her husband, seeing understanding and approval in his eyes, despite his practical question. He knew what it meant to her to help someone who reminded her of her own desperate journey. "We can afford it," Clara said firmly. "Besides, I've been thinking it might be time to expand our operation. There's a need in town for good bread, and Sarah can help me fill it." Thus began what the local newspaper would later call the Bread Brigade, Clara's informal network of women who found refuge at the Hayes Ranch and learned the skills they needed to build independent lives. Sarah was the first, but she wouldn't be the last. By midsummer, Clara had 3 women working with her, each with her own story of loss or hardship, each learning not just to bake bread, but to believe in herself again. The kitchen that had once echoed with Margaret's laughter now rang with multiple voices, sharing recipes and stories, planning futures that seemed possible again. "You're building something special here," Doc Henderson observed during one of his visits, watching Clara instruct a new arrival in the proper way to knead dough. "These women come to you broken, and they leave whole. That's a rare gift." Clara wiped flour from her hands and looked around the bustling kitchen with satisfaction. "They come with strength they don't recognize yet. I just help them find it again, like someone did for you. Like someone did for all of us." Clara corrected her gaze, moving to where Ethan was teaching Lila to throw a lasso in the front yard. "Healing's not a solitary business, Doc. We all need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves." The success of Clara's bread business brought unexpected attention. By August, she was receiving orders from as far away as Colorado Springs, and there was talk of opening an actual bakery in town. But it was a letter that arrived in September that truly changed everything. "It's from the governor," Ethan announced, holding up the official-looking envelope that had arrived with the weekly mail delivery. Clara felt a chill of old fear, the instinctive reaction of someone who'd spent months running from authority. "What does it say?" Ethan opened the letter, his expression growing more amazed with each line he read. "He wants to meet you. Says the evidence you provided about William Cross has helped solve 3 unsolved murders and exposed a corruption ring that went all the way to the state capitol. He's offering you a reward, $500, and wants to present it personally." $500 was more money than Clara had ever imagined possessing. It represented security, independence, the ability to expand her bread business or simply enjoy the luxury of not worrying about the future. But more than the money, the letter represented something even more valuable: vindication. "He believes me," she said wonderfully, her voice barely above a whisper. "After all these months of being afraid, of wondering if anyone would take my word against William's, he believes me." "The whole state believes you now," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "You're not just free, Clara. You're a hero." The ceremony took place in Denver in October on a crisp autumn day that reminded Clara of her first morning at the Hayes Ranch. She wore her best dress, dark blue wool with tiny pearl buttons, and carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had faced her demons and emerged victorious. Governor Samuel Crawford was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded Clara of her father. When he placed the official commendation in her hands, his words carried weight that went far beyond mere politics. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, using her married name with careful emphasis, "your courage in documenting and preserving evidence of these crimes has prevented countless future tragedies. William Cross and his associates preyed on vulnerable people for years, confident that their victims would never find the strength to speak against them. You proved them wrong." Clara accepted the honor with grace, but her mind was already turning toward home. The recognition was gratifying. The money would provide security for her growing household of women in need. But neither could compare to the joy of returning to the ranch where Ethan and Lila waited. "Are you ready to go home?" Ethan asked as they left the Capitol building, the ceremony behind them, and the future stretching ahead like an open road. Clara looked at her husband, strong and healthy, his blue eyes bright with love and pride, and felt the last shadow of her former fears dissolve. "I've been ready since the day I arrived," she said, "but now I know it will still be there when we get back." The train journey home gave them time to talk and plan to dream about the future they were building together. Clara's bread business was thriving. Lila was excelling in her studies and showing signs of inheriting her stepmother's gift with horses, and the ranch was more prosperous than it had been in years. "I have an idea," Clara said as the familiar landscape of their valley came into view. "What if we formalized what we're already doing? Created an actual school where women could learn not just baking, but other skills, bookkeeping, reading, even basic veterinary care. We could help them build real futures, not just escape their pasts." Ethan's smile was warm with approval. "The Whitmore School for Women." "The Hayes School," Clara corrected. "This is your home too, your vision too. Everything we build together." When they finally arrived at the ranch, tired but happy from their journey, they found more than just the familiar buildings and faces waiting for them. A new sign hung over the main gate, carved in beautiful script by Tom during their absence. It read simply, "Hayes Ranch, where hope rises like bread." Lila ran to meet them, her face bright with excitement and news to share. "Clara, Papa, you'll never guess what happened while you were gone. Zeus let me ride him. Really ride him, not just sit on his back. And Sarah's bread won first prize at the county fair, and Mrs. Patterson says I'm ready to start helping with the foaling next spring." Clara swept the child into her arms, marveling at the confident, joyful person she'd become. The silent, traumatized little girl who'd hidden in the cellar was gone, replaced by a young person who faced life with curiosity and courage. That night, after the excitement of homecoming had settled, and Lila was tucked into bed with stories of their Denver adventure, Clara and Ethan sat on their front porch watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked quietly. "The possibility of a different life? You could have stayed in Denver, used that reward money to start over completely. No one would have blamed you." Clara considered the question seriously, thinking of all the paths she might have taken, all the lives she might have lived. "I used to think freedom meant having choices," she said finally. "The right to go anywhere, be anyone, start fresh whenever I wanted. But real freedom isn't about having options. It's about choosing what matters most and building something lasting around that choice." She leaned into her husband's warm strength, breathing in the familiar sense of home. Fresh bread cooling in the kitchen, horses in the barn, the crisp promise of winter in the mountain air. "I chose you," she continued, "both of you. I chose this ranch, this life, this community of women we're building. Not because I had no other options, but because this is where my heart belongs." Ethan pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I hired you to bake bread, but you baked my soul back to life instead." Clara smiled at the words, remembering her first day when everything had seemed uncertain and fragile. Now, surrounded by the sounds of home and the warmth of love freely given and received, she understood that some things were worth more than gold bread that rose perfectly in the oven. A child's laughter echoing through familiar rooms, the quiet contentment of building something beautiful with someone you loved. The bread was just the beginning, she said softly. Everything else, the healing, the hope, the happiness that just comes from living life with an open heart. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to another story of love, conquering fear of broken things, made whole of families, formed not by blood, but by choice and commitment, and the daily decision to care for one another, no matter what storms might come. In the kitchen, tomorrow's bread was already rising proof that some things could be counted on, that love and patience and the right kind of attention could transform simple ingredients into something that nourished both body and soul. And in the morning, Clara would wake in the arms of a man who cherished her in a house full of people who needed her, ready to face whatever adventures the day might bring. The silence had been broken. The bread had risen. And somewhere in the Colorado mountains, a woman who had once thought herself beyond salvation was living proof that it's never too late to find your way home.